Hey, PreSales Collective, it's your host, James Kaikis, and today I'm going to be joined by Tom Banton, Global Vice President of Solutions Engineering at eightfold AI. Tom is also a PSLC member and a PreSales Collective Ambassador. The topic of today's episode is back on the road. For some pre-sales professionals, we're going back to in-person meetings. And I don't know about you, but I'm a little bit rusty when it comes to in-person networking, in-person presentations, and in-person communications. And so in today's episode, Tom is going to break down his experience from having in-person meetings. Tom and his team have done a number of in-person meetings with some of the best-known companies in the entire world. And he's going to share his learnings from those meetings because there's some small things that we may have forgotten or even take for granted about in-person events. So Tom is going to break those down and we're going to go pretty tactical in today's episode. So if you're a pre-sales professional who's never done in-person meetings, or you did in-person meetings prior to the pandemic, or you're a new leader or an existing leader, today's episode is for you. Enjoy. Today's episode is sponsored by Avneo. Feeling a little overwhelmed in your bid management, thinking there must be a better and more efficient way to manage RFPs, RFIs, and security questionnaires? Look no further than Avneo RFX, a Salesforce native, fully automated RFX solution designed to help you win more of the right business. To learn more, head over to avneo.com or search Avneo in the Salesforce App Exchange. Tom, welcome to the PreSales Podcast. How are you today?
Good morning, James. Doing well. How about you?
I'm great. It's good to have you on the podcast. You are someone who's very engaged in the PreSales Collective, PreSales Academy. For those who can't see you, you are wearing your PreSales Academy Career Advisor shirt, which I love. You're obviously super passionate about helping the future of sales engineers. So I am curious, why do you get so engaged in PreSales Academy?
I had a couple of mentors, but it was about 10 years in the career before I actually had formal training on it. And that's when my career just took a whole different arc. So as you always say, this is the best job people don't know about. So anything we can do, in some ways, I'm so envious of these people that come out of college or start their pre-sales journey in their 20s, so I love paying it forward. And again, I just love teaching the next generations of pre-sales professionals.
We appreciate you being so involved. I think that's a lot of the reason why we do this, because Eugene and I both looked at each other and said, man, I wish we had this when we first started. And that's a lot of the genesis of why we keep doing it. It's almost like a better late than never mentality.
Correct.
The two of us finally met in person, face-to-face in Miami. I was out in Miami for a SaaStr event, my first real in-person event for 2022. It was amazing. It was amazing to meet you face-to-face, to be a part of a group of people, networking again. I almost feel like I forgot how to do that. But the two of us had a wonderful conversation at lunch, especially on this topic. So it was wonderful to meet you face-to-face. And it just made me realize how much I missed that type of interaction.
I will tell you, James, not many people get me to Miami. So congrats to you for getting me down there.
I appreciate you picking me up and us grabbing lunch. It was great. Part of the conversation that we had was around this back to work and back to meeting customers. But you told me this amazing story that I want to share about how you hired somebody during the pandemic. And correct me if I'm wrong, but their requirement was that you spent time face-to-face doing onboarding. Is that right?
Correct. So I was given a directive from my leadership to hire somebody from this well-known company. And I courted this person for about 2 months, at least weekly chats. It was a good conversation. It was the longest interview process I ever had. And about 2 months, then they said, okay, I'm going to sign, but I want to come meet you and I want to onboard in person. And this is November, before the vaccines had come out. So I had to reach out to HR and said, can I go meet this gentleman? And we decided to meet in Jacksonville because I have another employee up there. And it was kind of like going to The Shining. I mean, there was nobody in this hotel. We had all the conference rooms. But in 2 days, we were able to onboard much faster than we could do in 2 weeks of online training and meetings. And then again, we were still trying to be careful. So we would walk outside and there was a little pond that we could walk around. We had so much in common that I never would have discovered had all of the meetings even just been, we're going to have 15 minutes of coffee on Zoom. And he was able to watch me present. I was able to coach him on presenting. But again, I really got to know this person extremely well just because of those 2 days together.
I love that story and all the things that you did behind the scenes to get approval to do that face to face. It's something that I, as a leader, am missing. I love the convenience of this virtual world and building relationships, but there is just nothing like in person. There's just this different aspect to it, and you almost forget about it until you actually have it. You're like, wow, I forgot how amazing this is and how much more productive you can be or how much further you can get to know somebody that you just can't get to that level on Zoom without a lot of intention.
It was kind of interesting too, because it was a bit in the funk. We were deep into the pandemic and it sort of reignited my spark to onboard. And it was actually that training people in person, I think, that said, okay, I want to do an academy. And so, we started our PreSales Academy as well, where we're pulling people right out of school. And it reignited my passion to train people.
I love that, Tom, and we're going to dive into that. But before we get there on the topic, talk to us about your pre-sales career journey. What got you to where you are today?
It's a long road. I actually started in manufacturing. I literally said, I want a job where I can travel, and I wished for it and I prayed for it. And that's one of those, be careful what you wish for. I implemented an MRP system in under 30 days, and I went to work for essentially that company. And I was a consultant, and I loved consulting. I love seeing projects through. The pre-sales gentleman, it was pre-sales back then, was out sick. So they said, hey, do you think you can present the solution? And I did, and it went really well. And they're like, you're never going back to consulting. And, I had a couple of great mentors, and that company went through 7 mergers in 7 years. And, it became Epicor, and then went on to Oracle, where I was at for 12 years. And they were the first ones to really invest in sort of my training. And then from Oracle to a couple startups, and went from being an IC to a leader to an IC carrying a bag back to a leader again. So I've had every role from solution architect to global vice president, business transformation, but I still love working deals. I still love being in front of customers and presenting.
That's awesome, Tom. And I really appreciate you sharing your background. It is funny, right? You work in post-sales. I'm the same way. I worked in post-sales, doing a lot of the implementation. Then you get the taste of the pre-sale world, and you're like, wow, this is the job right here. This is amazing. One of the things that I appreciate in all of our conversations, no matter how senior you are in the organization, you like to stay really hands-on. I love your philosophy around that in terms of being able to even demo in the field, be able to show and coach and have that credibility with your team, because a lot of leaders don't have that as they continue to move up within an organization.
Going to the topic of being on the road again, one of the reasons why I have been on the road so much is it's still not mandatory for people to be in person. So if my lead on a deal isn't comfortable going to an in-person meeting, I will step in and replace that person or back that person up, because I can still demo and present. And that is how I get to quite a few of the presentations that I've been at.
Tom, that's so interesting. I never really thought about that aspect of things of, okay, I have employees, they're not mandated to travel, but they have a customer on-site visit who goes and, maybe it's someone else on the team, but I like that you're stepping up and taking some of those meetings. It is very interesting. And, as we get into our topic of back on the road, how are you feeling about being back on the road and meeting customers and employees face to face?
You can get things done in person that you just can't do over Zoom. And especially if you take some of the social aspects of meeting for lunch before, taking customers out to dinner, that's where relationships are formed. But one thing is we've gotten so used to all of our meetings being on Zoom that I'm sure your calendar, I literally back to back, 1 hour blocks of meetings with, 100, 200 emails coming through. The moment you go on the road, you can only do that one meeting. And yes, plain Wi-Fi works 50% of the time. But my first advice to people is make sure you tell people you're back on the road and that you're not going to respond to that email like you normally would. You may not even get to Slack or a text right away because people are so used to us being so reachable. So you've got to make sure that you clear your inbox and you let people know, I am going to be traveling the next couple of days. If you're a leader, you've got to have generals appointed to make decisions while you're in that meeting.
Tom, it's so funny that you say that because I've been doing a little bit of personal and professional travel, even that Miami trip. And what I told everyone is I forgot how unproductive I was when I was on the road. I'm still trying to catch up for the last couple of weeks. And you're right. Everyone expected us to be in front of our computer, immediately available, back-to-back meetings, responding to emails. And I just came back from a holiday for my daughter's spring break, and I mean, I'm digging myself out. It's going to take me days to dig myself out. It's tough. Going back on the plane Wi-Fi didn't work for a couple of my flights. It was spotty. You're right. And it changes the way we are productive. So obviously, you and I are excited to be face-to-face. We see the benefits of meeting in person. At PreSales Collective now, I don't go to customer meetings. That's a little bit different. Maybe I'm meeting with partners or sponsors. I'm meeting with community members. But how many customer presentations have you done so far face-to-face?
By my count, 7, and some of them quite large with groups of 30 people or so. And then, we also did a trade show as well in person. And that's probably a whole nother story, a whole nother podcast.
So I'm going to ask you about both of those. So what was the trade show experience like? I can't even imagine what a trade show or large scale conference would be right now.
So this was HR Tech, the largest, HR software show. And a lot of major companies pulled out, and our company went all in. And even myself, I was questioning this, going, is this the right thing to do? We got there, and first off, we were slammed. We were packed, and people were grateful for us being in person. They were ready to go. This was, I think, between Delta and Omicron. So, it was kind of a little safe bubble there. You had to wear a mask in the actual conference. So to think about demoing for 4 to 8 hours on a floor wearing a mask. So that had its own challenges. I sort of coached people on greetings. That's a whole other topic as well. But again, most people were grateful. And then you had happy hours and the mask came ripping off. And all of a sudden you found yourself surrounded by a couple hundred people going, oh, well, here we go. And again, it was all voluntary. So we had 8 demo stations plus 3 conference rooms. I should have had about 22 SCs with me. I had 16, and 6 of them were brand new. Had been there for a month.
Trial by fire.
But it was great. We were doing demos right up until the show was closing. It was a phenomenal show for us. We got great response from it.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. On the flip side of things, a 30-person meeting. I can't even imagine a 30-person meeting to a large company, a large enterprise. What was that experience like?
You should really try to plan as much as you can and talk to your coach and find out what is their mask policy, what is your mask policy, what are people comfortable greetings. But even despite that, when you're in a large room and you've got an executive from your company and an executive from their company, they're going to sort of set the pace. I don't instantly offer my hand. I wait to see if somebody else does, but I could see people like constantly offering their hand, and I could see people really not comfortable to shake. So sort of take your physical cues, step back, try and learn ahead of time. Because it is, do people really want to shake your hand? I mean, I would rather almost hug somebody than shake a hand, but it was some awkward elbow bumping, fist bumping, hand shaking, hugging all around the table, depending on how well people knew each other. And there were a couple people that in different meetings would still have a mask on. And a couple of cases, I have a gentleman I work with who's a brand new father. He's like, I'm sorry, I have a newborn at home. And if we were with him closely, he would actually ask us to put a mask on. So you've got to understand people's level of comfort. Another employee, they also wear a mask, but I think because this person was the only person wearing a mask in a large room, I think they felt peer pressure is real, James. All right. So you've got to really make sure you're comfortable going on the road and being in these situations. And I even said, you really weren't comfortable taking your mask off, were you? And they were like, no, but it just felt weird for me to be the only person with it on. So be prepared for these kinds of situations. And I wait to see if someone's going to offer me their hand before I reach mine out. And if they don't, then, I think, again, bowing is a great sign of respect. It's sometimes easier and less awkward than fist bump, elbow bumps.
There's so many things there that are so interesting that we take for granted. But you're right, the peer pressure is real. And so some people may or may not be comfortable being on the road. And even when you are on the road, what is your level of comfort? It's interesting that you bring up the greeting aspect. I would assume that is what has changed the most to this new world of face-to-face.
And again, we even said, in the large group, what are people comfortable with? But the moment like somebody starts a handshake, around the robin, you can see people sort of fall in line to that. But again, you can see that they really aren't comfortable doing it. And I live in Florida, so I've been sort of used to no masks, no rules for a while. And then, some of my meetings were in Texas, which is somewhat similar, but a lot of my employees come from California, and you can see them go, this is really an interesting situation.
It is. It's almost interesting because there's no real standard on what that is. And that's why I really wanted to bring up this whole greeting thing, because we talked about this face to face. You just don't know what people's level of comfort is. And you're almost right on the hug versus the handshake. You're shaking hands multiple times. You're just not really sure where people's level of comfortability is. On the flip side of things, what is still the same that it was pre-pandemic?
You can't count on the technology in any company, so make sure we literally were in this massive corporation and Wi-Fi worked everywhere except for where you had to connect to the projector. So, I had to use my phone as a hotspot. You need to get there early because you're probably still going to have a mixture of online people and people in person. So you're still going to probably have to connect to web conference. One of the first meetings we did, again, major corporation, we were one of the first people, they hadn't reopened their offices yet. We had to go to something like 11 conference rooms to find one that had the equipment to set up in it because people had come into the office and taken everything out of there to go work from home. So, a good sales engineer always has every possible connector they need, every possible extension cord, always be prepared. But that's especially true now because a lot of companies are still on skeleton IT staffs. They aren't used to having people in person as well. So just be prepared. And we've even had, the projector doesn't work. So we're in person and we all end up on a Zoom meeting anyways, because we can't get the projector to work.
What I really want to understand is what is it like to present to a big company with maybe a number of major executives in person, but executives online as well? When you're doing virtual, everyone's there and you're kind of worried about them paying attention. But when you're in person, you can obviously see the engagement and read the room. But when you have a combination of both, what is that experience like? Do you have any learnings from that?
I guess I've been lucky that most of the executives I've actually been in, and the reason that we all came in person is because the executives were going to be there. You have to make a point, though, of also making sure that you're answering. The people online are going to be quieter. So, hey, are there any questions online? And make sure you call them out because a lot of times they aren't going to get heard over the people that are in the room. The other thing I want to point out, and this is one of the things I mentioned to you, in the online world, you see my face, but you don't really know if I'm looking at a second monitor, checking Slack, checking my phone. We were in this one meeting and our hosts from a partner company were on their phones the entire time. So Eightfold and the customer are all engaged and our partner is sitting there on their phone, both of them. And I was just like, come on, people, we all flew in for this. It's not like the phone is out of screen view. I can see that you're actually on your phone there. But I think everyone's so used to multitasking. And I've seen some customers still kind of going down the multi. But again, if a customer is inviting you to be in person, put that device away, shut it off, put it on silent, let people know that you're not going to be reachable for those 1, 2, or 3 hours. If you're an avid notes taker and you want to use your Mac for that, just say, hey, by the way, I'm using my computer to take notes. I'm not on here checking email. So people think that you are paying attention. That goes back to what we used to teach beforehand. You're in the room. You have to be present and give people all attention. You can't be multitasking in an in-person meeting.
That's a very good point. And, it goes back to the productivity and all the expectations that people have had, and it hasn't changed. But Tom, you mentioned something about the trade show, is that you mentioned there was a lot of new folks that joined your team. There are a lot of new pre-sales professionals who have learned the role in a strictly remote environment. And as I mentioned, I think one of the best skills about being in person is being able to understand how to read a room, to understand who's the decision maker, who's the champion, who has influence, and how to engage them. But a lot of our professionals who have only learned in a remote first setting don't have that experience. So from your perspective, how are some of your new folks adjusting?
I teach a course in demo and presentation skills. We had to adapt that course for online. That's one of my favorite courses to teach is presentation skills, greetings, making eye contact, pausing when you get a question in, thinking about the question. So before the trade show, we literally ran a course on, you call it trade show one-on-one. And we had things for greetings, for how to present, eye contact. I did my best to prepare them. And again, this is something that I've taught and learned for my whole career.
I like that preparation and training aspect of things because it really does give them a level of comfort and practice, because you're right. In person is definitely a different environment. And even presenting to a number of executives versus the trade show floor, it is very different as well. Would you say that you've learned anything in particular around the adjustment for these folks? Is there something that you expected them to know, but they've had a tougher time adjusting to because they haven't experienced in person?
I think eye contact in person is something you have to get used to. People aren't comfortable with it. And some people aren't even comfortable with it on a web meeting. You have to look at the camera as a set of eyes, but just slowing down. And then, when we started pre-sales, or I started pre-sales, demos used to be 4 to 8 hours minimum. Now in this new world, they're an hour. So you really have to sort of concentrate your message, and you have to connect. And we don't have an hour to do slides to tee up the demo. You kind of got to get right into the content. But in person, you have to be louder because you're not like speaking into a microphone. So slow your talk track down, but keep your message concentrated, eye contact. Really think about questions. We also teach a course in objection handling. And again, somebody asks a question, you really need to think about it. And if you don't understand it, paraphrase it back. Did I answer your question? So just some basic presentation skills that, PreSales Academy we teach as well too, but you've got to pull all that into play in an in-person meeting.
I was going to actually ask you about objection handling, because I feel like objection handling versus in-person versus Zoom is much different.
Because people read body language. They can tell if you're, So we do objection handling happy hours. Our company does something called Objection Handling March Madness, where everybody in the go-to-market team will actually get bracketed off and we'll get down to the final two. So it is something we take seriously. And I guess that's the other thing too, is going out with a junior person. If I'm there or one of my executives there, they know that they've got backup. So if they're asking a question in a presentation, if they pause or look at me, then I can take the question and answer it for them. So that's another thing we practice is, giving the right for somebody else to answer the question or step in. And I travel with some great leaders on my team who love to handle the tough questions. So a lot of times I will let my CRO or my, president take a question, because if they answer it, it's a much more powerful answer.
And that makes me wonder how prep has gone. For example, right, you went to a big customer meeting on site, many executives, partners. Did you prep both virtually and in person? And was the prep for the in-person much different? Because I reflect back on my career, right? A lot of the best meetings were when the AE and SC were just super in lockstep, kind of played off each other. Things went well, but it's been a lot harder to do that virtually versus in person.
So at Oracle, you flew the whole team in the day before a meeting, and you were in a war room and all the managers were there and you practice everything. And it's been hard to get to that, especially in a startup, because we're just so overscheduled. But for these big meetings, we did fly in a day in advance, and we did rent a conference room in the hotel. And we absolutely did, okay, who's presenting what, who's going to take what kind of question, what happens if we can't get Wi-Fi, do we have backup slides? So we really did try to prepare as much as possible.
I love hearing that, because I think it's extremely important. Let me ask you this. You're obviously very passionate about your employees and your team and really coaching. How different is coaching in person now that you're on the road with somebody, whether it's prep for the meeting or right after the meeting?
So we also try to do feedback right after the meeting. It's hard, especially traveling with some people that my first time working with them in person. Where are they going to go, even though we prepared this? And one of my employees told this analogy, and I'm like, oh, where are you going with this? But I had to trust them. I didn't want to step in. I let it, and it was a beautiful analogy. And I'm like, wow, he really stuck the landing on that one. So having a little bit of confidence. So on a Zoom meeting, people talk over each other. It's, because I didn't realize, but you can't have that talking over each other in an in-person meeting. It just makes it look awkward. So you have to trust who's ever got the floor to let him finish. And then if you have another point to make, is it really worth making? Or are you just speaking because you want your voice heard? Again, taking it to the point where you got to make sure your communication is clear, concise, and you're not just speaking for the sake of, again, having your voice heard.
I really appreciate that perspective and love the tacticalness of it, because I think, again, it's just things that we have forgotten. We're in the role day to day, I mean, this was just part of our DNA. But now that we are going back in person, we're flexing new muscles. And again, a lot of times people who have not been in this role, they're learning new ways of doing things. And so there is an adjustment period. And we're probably as a profession not as tight as we used to be when it comes to in-person meetings and in-person presentations. But I think everyone knows that that's okay. The customer expectations, they've changed a little bit too. With PreSales Collective, we have seen a number of new managers come into this profession. People who were individual contributors pre-pandemic, been promoted to leadership during the pandemic. Is there any advice that you have for those folks as they're adjusting from life as an IC in person to life as a leader in person?
Get some management coaching. Find somebody in your network that you can bounce ideas with. Pre-sales is a great career where you can be an IC versus you shouldn't feel compelled to go into management, and we've talked about that before as well. But by all means, find some people in your network that can help you when you have some situations to deal with. And then again, if you are sending your team back out on the road, most likely it's going to be voluntary, but ask them, have they ever done an in-person meeting before? And, practice things like greetings, introductions. How are you going to introduce yourself? Follow the hierarchies of the room as well. So, let the leaders go first and the floor is theirs as long as they're speaking, and then fill in as necessary. But, there's training for presentation skills. And I guess, we are going through some management training as well, but there's not dedicated pre-sales management training that I've found. There's sales management training and there's manager training. There isn't pre-sales manager training. And we all know pre-sales professionals are an interesting breed of people. You have to learn how to give feedback, constructive criticism. So like I said, find a couple mentors. If people listening, if they want some help, they can reach out to me. I love mentoring people, as you well know.
Appreciate that, Tom. And I think that's what you and I have talked about. We want to be able to help service the pre-sales profession through PreSales Leadership Collective and PreSales Academy in the future. Tom, I have one last advice question. You've given us a lot of very tactical perspective, which is what I really wanted to get into, which I appreciate. For the individuals who are preparing to go out on the road, what are some reminders for them, or what is some advice for them to be more conscious of as they enter this new reality?
Travel isn't what it used to be. 90 minutes to get an Uber out of Houston. So don't think you can fly in a couple hours before a meeting and catch it. A lot of places are still not running at capacity. We think there's another wave coming. And we talked about make sure your team knows that you're not going to be reachable. Have people who can cover for you when you're out of office. Work with your coaches to find out, again, what are they comfortable with? What's it like there? What's their mask policy? What's their greeting policy? And if at all possible, try to even do a dry run in person. Just say, hey, we want to make sure that we can hook up. Can we get there a day early or possibly even a couple hours early to check the connections and make sure everything's working? And then if you get there a day early, hey, can we do a dry run with you, the coach? I mean, some basics, but we haven't done it for a while. Oh, can we take you out to lunch? Can we take you out to dinner type deal as well? We've had some great work dinners, and people are just desperate to socialize again. I will say that the energy at work dinners has been totally different than what it used to be. Before it was like, oh, I guess I'm going to go out with this customer. Now it's like, oh, I'm going out with this customer. Yay. But again, the best thing about pre-sales people is we're good listeners. If the customer's talking, let them talk, listen, and especially at dinner, like active listening. It's all about them. It's not about you. And then, follow through. Hey, thanks for inviting us. How did it go? Get feedback from the customer, get feedback from your team. Unfortunately, we have had a few, oh my God, we have to race to the airport, but try not to do that. I will say one of the meetings that we had, everything happened the hour after the demo. If we had to race off to catch a flight, we would have missed a whole level of communication and importance. So try not to fly in, do the meeting, fly out, because you are back to back to back. Try to give yourself some cushion where you can possibly practice before and stay afterwards and socialize. If it's a really cool company, we've gotten some awesome plant office tours as well. The more time a customer is willing to give you, you should take, because they're excited to meet people as well too.
Tom, wonderful feedback. I really appreciate the conversation today. Not only did we talk high level, but we went very tactical. And I think as we're going back to this new reality of in-person / hybrid, this episode is going to be extremely impactful and important for the community. So thanks for sharing the time with me today.
You're welcome, James. Always a pleasure. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday. All right, Tom, thanks for your time. Have a good one. All right, PreSales Collective. I really enjoyed my conversation with Tom today. Tom and I had a very similar conversation in person when we met face-to-face in Miami, and we said, wow, we should really bring this to the PreSales Collective. So big shout out to Kevin Mefford, our head of community as well, who's working on some events around back to in-person. And hearing Tom's perspective of being in person makes me reflect on my own experiences pre-pandemic. There's a lot of things that we've taken for granted or have forgotten about. Personally, I've taken some flights over the last month and planned on working on the plane, but my Wi-Fi didn't work, which actually hurt my productivity. And I joked about it when I was in Miami. I didn't respond to many emails. I had deliverables that I didn't get to follow up on because I forgot how to flex that muscle. I forgot what it was like to be in person and making sure you're present in the moment and not multitasking and not doing lackluster follow-up. It's so important for us to hear perspectives from people like Tom that are in the field, face-to-face, meeting customers, meeting prospective clients to understand what are some of those things that we have forgotten about. How do we better prepare for them? For example, AESC communication in that presentation. How do we replicate what we did 2.5 years ago? It's a challenge. That in-person experience is not what it was pre-pandemic. And as we look toward the future and see hybrid environments, how do we make sure that we're present, reading the room, eye contact, objective handling in person, while also catering to that virtual audience? There could be an important decision maker that's on the line. So these are new skills that we're going to have to learn and practice to be effective. And so if you're back on the road and you have something to share that you think would be great for the community, please reach out to me on Slack. I always ask for the feedback. Please reach out to us. Let us know what you're doing, whether it's preparation, practice, post-meeting feedback. We want to hear from you so we can get these learnings out to the community so we as a profession can continue to progress and move forward. All right, PreSales Collective, I hope you liked today's episode. As always, please like and share the podcast. It really goes a long way. As always, I will see you next week.